The Human Rights Council adopted the Universal Periodic Review outcomes of Japan, Pakistan and Sri Lanka yesterday. In the presentation of the report, it mentioned that there was a significant number of recommendations pertaining to the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and the government had undertaken to repeal the act as a voluntary pledge.
Sri Lanka received a total of 294 recommendations. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as the lead government agency responsible for coordinating UPR-related matters, held a series of consultations with all relevant government authorities before formulating the position on the recommendations received during the fourth cycle. Following this extensive process, Sri Lanka has decided to support 173 recommendations and take note of 115. We have always participated actively in the regular human rights mechanisms. Two-thirds of the recommendations received pertaining to the independence of the National Human Rights Commission is also supported. Given the changed circumstances in the country since the PTA was enacted, the Ministry of Justice has actively reached out to engage in further consultations and receive additional views. The government has further undertaken to repeal the PTA as a voluntary pledge. Discussions are being held on the contours of a truth and reconciliation mechanism that would suit Sri Lanka in keeping with its constitutional framework.
Other factions commented with regards to the adopted Universal Periodic Review outcomes of Sri Lanka as well.
We are deeply concerned about the failure of the government to deliver justice for the victim of the 2019 Easter bomb attack. Sri Lankan Catholic Church and the families of the victim have been requesting an independent investigation for more than 4 years. Yet the justice for the victim has been delayed. Regarding the position of the Inspector General of Police, the government of Sri Lanka should take into the consideration the report of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry on the Easter attack and the Supreme Court judgment to avoid nominating those who are facing a disciplinary action. The families of the disappeared in the northern and eastern of Sri Lanka are still searching for truth and justice to the victim of enforced disappearance.
Since its last review, Sri Lanka did not implement any of the 9 recommendations related to civic space. We note that Sri Lanka accepted 24 of the 31 recommendations on civic space it received during this circle, including to ensure a safe environment for civil society, including human rights defenders and journalists, and refrain from imposing undue limitation on NGOs. We also documented restrictions on protests and harassment and intimidation of protesters, including against families of disappeared persons in the north and east.
And that despite repeated assurances by the government of Sri Lanka, including in previous UPRs, violations continue without any accountability or meaningful systemic reform. The Office of Missing Persons remains central to the government's purported intention to establish the fate of thousands of victims of enforced disappearance. However, it has failed to complete an investigation, even a single case, and has widely lost the confidence of victims' families. In 2022, the PTA was used to detain student activists protesting the government's economic policies. An anti-terrorism bill, which has been proposed to replace the PTA, would potentially criminalize a wide range of legitimate activism while granting sweeping arbitrary powers to the police, military and president.
Disappointingly, despite the government's support of a de facto moratorium on arrests under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, there were 4 new arrests carried out arbitrarily using the PTA in May 2023 and 3 arrests in August 2022. While we welcome Sri Lanka's support for recommendations to replace the PTA, the new anti-terrorism bill does not meet international human rights standards. The economic and political crisis in Sri Lanka directly affected the right to health, education, social security, adequate food and an adequate standard of living. Sri Lanka must implement the supported recommendations on these issues to protect these rights, including an expanded and effective social protection system as a priority.
We are concerned that the recently proposed Anti-Terrorism Act, which would replace the PTA, will further empower the authorities to impose draconian measures against those exercising their fundamental rights. We urge Sri Lanka to reconsider the proposed legislation and ensure that all those who have been unjustly detained under the current act are released immediately and without conditions.
In this area. Since the last review, we have seen an increased pressure on dissenting voices in Sri Lanka, exemplified by the arrest under vague charges of social media activist Sipal Amarasinghe, who is known for his critical online commentary. The arrest of stand-up comedian Natasha Badiri-Saria while she attempted to flee the country showcases the shrinking space for artistic expression and the suppression of creativity. Both arrests raise renewed concerns about the ICCPR Act of 2007 being used as a tool for the Sri Lankan state to crack down on dissent and curtail free speech.